Today I get to share with you some of the details of some of the research we've been working through with the Property Council around home care services in retirement living. And we had a great little entree for that this morning with the panel session. I'll try as best as I can to not replicate what we spoke about, but to first, I guess, take you back on a little bit of a journey into the home care sector, to talk a little bit about the scale and the scope of what happens within home care and the funding, to give you a little bit of a context of the innovations that might be potentially available for us in this space. I was talking to a friend just before the session. Although some of what's about to happen to us is new, I think it's probably the most exciting period for the retirement living sector, for those that are interested in moving forward and embracing it. And I think the opportunities for those organisations to work towards a closer relationship with their residents, with their clients, and helping them to enjoy lives longer, ideally also to avoid institutional care, which is a primary part of some of the findings. Firstly, though, just a quick recap around home care, just how big it is. We spend a lot of time talking about home care packages. Home care packages are actually the least of the home care stuff. In fact, residential aged care, which consumes about $12 billion a year, is actually much smaller than home care and home support services. There's nearly 1 million Australians out there that have access to it. A lot of it is in the form of HAC, and part of it is in packages, and a lot of it doesn't really get recorded because a lot of it is coming from a user pay environment. And as was mentioned in the session this morning, we have amongst us a huge cohort, a huge demographic of people coming through the system. They are heavily demanding. They are empowered in many ways. They're better resourced in terms of their financial capacity to buy stuff. And because of some of the analysis that we're going to look at in a second, there's no doubt that we're going to have to buy more stuff as that interdependence between taxpayers and consumers starts to get out of balance. And that's one of the most exciting parts. We spend a lot of time about CDC, consumer involvement in determining services. In my experience, nothing drives consumer-directed investment more than asking people to pay for stuff. And that's the journey that we're going on. Still relatively thinly spread, and I think one of the things that's going to change massively is this is still dominated by the not-for-profit sector and government. It's really interesting as we started to move into less regulated models in residential aged care. We kind of thought we'd have this massive big shift away from not-for-profit and government and more to the private sector. That hasn't happened as much as we expected. Some big not-for-profit organisations hanging in there, some of them really growing. Whereas I think in the home care space, there's going to be less restrictions, less regulations, and the capacity for people to be much more innovative, which I think will tend to come from the for-profit sector and from innovative not-for-profit operators. And so we do expect government involvement, and we're seeing it all the time, particularly at the local government level, the home care provision being released. The home care services, we spoke about it a little bit today. I think Nick was saying he doesn't like care because it has connotations around healthcare. And he's quite right. In many regards, most of what we do is not clinical. In the home care environment, it's a lot of it, activities, supporting people with their activities of daily living is one thing, but a lot of it is avoiding them getting to that place in the first instance, helping them with maintenance, helping them with domestic services. Delivered well, it can not only help them not to have to do those services, but actually empower them, enable them to be able to focus on the stuff that they can do, and so that it's not a steady deterioration. Government funding, $2.8 billion. Compare that to nursing homes, to residential aged care, around about $11 billion. Disproportionate in terms of the numbers. We've got 190,000 people odd in RACs at the moment, nearly 900,000 people within the home care space, and it consumes that amount of money. That is going to result in more and more pressure. You know that the Commonwealth's preference is to try and focus funding on home care services and avoid, if possible, the less expensive residential aged care services. You guys have seen variations of this graph a billion times. I really love this one because it's not accumulating how many older people there are in the system. This one's actually looking at the number of people over 75 appearing every year. And it's really interesting when we, quite often we look at accumulations for aged care further on down the track when the number of people grows, but just have a look at the number of additional people over 75 coming through the system every year. We kind of talk about baby boomers as being 1946 to 1964. That's because 1946 is when the year after the soldiers came back. Australia was different. This is where the year the soldiers came back. I reckon that's about 9 months after the soldiers came back. We were on to something a little bit earlier. So we actually had high fertility rates leading up to that. And just in the 4 years before that, Collingwood won 4 premierships in a row. And it created a level of buoyancy and excitement about the future of this country. And I think people felt confident when planning their families. The other thing that I think is really, really compelling, and we spent lots of times in aged care, resi care, it being heavily regulated, always saying, oh, it's never going to happen, it's never going to happen, the government's never going to do it. And then they really dropped this big change in February next year, the portability of home care services. And it blew me away because it is happening. And this is a big reason it's happening. We spend a lot of time sort of saying, look, it's all about making people happier and empowering. The truth is, a lot of it is just around money. So today, there is 5 of us, taxpayers, for every older person. And over the coming decades, you see all that graph before, it's going to drop down to about 2.7. And I'm still going to be working when that happens. So it's really critical that we get this sorted. Costello called this the dependency ratio, the number of taxpayers that have to do it. So what do we have to do? We'd have to stop assuming that we're going to have everything paid for us in the future. We're going to focus on delivering services efficiently and effectively wherever we can. And we're going to have to pay for it ourselves. And so I think in the future, this mentality we've got of entitlement and expecting stuff and hanging on to the family home and all of those sorts of things, we're slowly going to be letting them go. And there is no more, in my experience, there's no more efficient and effective environment to be able to deliver home care environments in an area of set geography where you have older people requiring services.